My name is Ahmed. I was an Imam, a figure of authority in a world where questioning faith is forbidden, respected, revered. But inside, I carried a storm that would threaten everything I knew. In the heart of Saudi Arabia, under the gaze of a watchful community, I wore the mask of piety, while my spirit languished in an oppressive silence. I was suffocating, longing for a meaning that eluded me, trapped in a religious prison I dared not scrutinize. Then one fateful night, everything changed. A reckless moment led to a terrible car accident, and in that darkness, I found myself in front of a radiant light. Jesus, not as a figure from distant tales, but as the living truth, stood before me. He called my name, Ahmed, and a flood of revelations washed over me. I saw beyond the veil of human institutions, exposing a spiritual war that had entangled my soul. What I thought was divine was, in reality, a complex web of control and fear. Awakening from that coma was disorienting. The light I once craved now felt like a heavy burden. I returned not only to my life but to a harsh reality, my family's scorn, the shunning of my community, the label of heretic. I grappled with an existential crisis, trapped between the two worlds, the conviction I had experienced and the risk of losing everything I held dear. As the days turned into months, my heart cried out for truth in a world where silence reigned. In secret, I sought Jesus among the pages of the Bible, discovering stories of courage that mirrored my own. Each word breathed life into my weary spirit. I found a clandestine community of seekers who, like me, dared to step into the light. Something within me shifted. I realized my transformation was not merely personal. It was a calling. I had been given a profound mission to awaken others who were lost in the shadows. No longer would I remain silent. I would share this truth, even at great personal risk. With newfound courage, I turned my back on the darkness that once enveloped me. Join me on this journey as I reveal the miraculous path from despair to hope and the spiritual awakening that awaits those who dare to listen. Before we dive deeper, comment below. Where are you watching from? And what time is it in your part of the world? Your stories matter. And if you love Jesus, subscribe to Truth from Beyond, because what you'll hear today is not just a testimony, it's the beginning of your own awakening. In the conservative neighborhood of Saudi Arabia, where I lived, reverence for Islamic traditions permeated the very air we breathed. The walls seemed to echo with long-held beliefs and doctrines, fostering a climate where questioning faith was not just discouraged, it was outright dangerous. My name is Ahmed, and I had always held the esteemed role of an Imam in my community, a position that came with its own set of expectations and responsibilities. I walked the delicate line between faith and tradition, but deep inside, a gnawing sense of disquiet tugged at me. Something wasn't aligning, but the oppressive silence around me made it virtually impossible to voice my doubts. One fateful evening, I fell ill quite suddenly, collapsing in my study. As darkness enveloped me, I slipped into what felt like a deep abyss, devoid of sound or sensation. And yet, in that void, a light began to crack open. I encountered something profound, a radiant presence that felt both familiar and otherworldly. It was Jesus. The love emanating from him was overwhelming, saturating my being with a warmth I had never known. In those moments, I wasn't just an Imam, I was merely a soul seeking truth. As we connected, he spoke to me, his words piercing through the fabric of my long-held beliefs, revealing the layers of deception that encased my reality. Ahmed, you've been shackled by a hidden agenda that thrives on control and fear, he said. In that sacred moment, revelations unfolded like petals of a flower, each one exposing the intricate webs woven by the elite to manipulate faith and politics. I saw visions of my community, The world beyond struggling in conflicts fueled by propaganda, and the ongoing spiritual war that raged not only within us, but across nations. It seemed the turmoil stemmed from a simple, tragic truth. The division we lived in was carefully cultivated. The messages of love had been twisted into tools of oppression, used to govern hearts and minds through fear and separation. As Jesus continued to guide me through these revelations, every image struck me with a heaviness that was both illuminating and terrifying. The truth will set you free, but it will also isolate you, he warned, the weight of each word sinking deep into my gut. The oppressive silence that surrounded questioning faith began to shift, and I realized I was no longer just an observer. I was being called to action. Each heartbeat reverberated with urgency. This awakening was more than personal. It was a clarion call to awaken others to the deceptions that bound us, to dismantle the walls that divided communities based on fear instead of love. But with this newfound clarity came stark realizations about the life I had led. I understood that leaving my position as an imam, a role I had held with pride, would be nothing less than walking into the unknown, a path fraught with challenges. The fear of being ostracized by my community haunted me. What would they do when they discovered I no longer adhered to the beliefs I had preached? What kind of backlash would I face from those who held power? As I navigated these treacherous waters of faith and freedom, I felt the tension boiling within me. The spiritual war wasn't just an idea. It was a reality I now had to confront head-on. In that state of revelation, I found the strength to silence the doubts that clouded my mind. I would no longer allow fear to dictate my actions. I emerged from my coma not just physically awake, but spiritually reborn. The mission became clear. To share these sacred truths about Jesus and the deceptions entrenched within our societies. I could no longer be a vessel for blind faith. I had to actively participate in this awakening, reaching out to those suffocated by the same fears I had harbored. As I gathered the courage to engage with others, I couldn't help but sense that my journey was only just beginning, and a deeper understanding of the truth awaited. In the heart of my community, I stood as a respected imam, a figure draped in the fabric of tradition and faith. At only 35, my charisma drew people to me, and my words resonated with those who sought guidance. Yet beneath the surface of my successful exterior lay an emotional void that gnawed at my spirit. The rules, rituals, and customs that I had followed with unwavering blind obedience began to feel suffocating. I found myself grappling with a clash that left me unsettled. My deep-seated beliefs incessantly battled with a yearning for a more profound meaning in life. The expectation to uphold these religious standards weighed heavily on my heart, creating a silent turmoil I could no longer ignore. One night, that silent struggle culminated in a harrowing episode. I fell ill, the world around me fading into a blur as the darkness engulfed me. I felt as if I was being pulled underwater, sinking deeper into an abyss that offered no solace. But then, in that deep darkness, a light emerged. A brilliant, inviting light that engulfed me entirely. It wasn't just illumination. It carried a presence, a warmth that wrapped around me and filled me with a sense of unearthly peace. As clarity flooded my senses, I realized I was in the presence of Jesus, and in that moment, I was stripped bare of pretense and fear. Ahmed, he spoke softly, yet his voice echoed through my very being. Your life has been built upon a hidden agenda, one designed by those who manipulate faith for their own purpose. You've followed paths laid out for you without questioning the truth behind them. The impact of his words hit me like a tidal wave, unleashing a torrent of realizations I had never fully grasped. The structures of power that seemed so solid were, in fact, based on deceptions that kept my community and countless others shackled in a cycle of fear and division. I witnessed flashes of the conflicts that erupted around the globe, leaders feeding on discord, while the voiceless struggled beneath the weight of manipulation. As each revelation unfolded before me, I felt the urgency of this spiritual war swell within my heart. I saw how societies were crafted around these lies, spinning stories that turned neighbor against neighbor, all to keep control firmly in the hands of the elite. This manipulation didn't merely restrain individuals, it divided families and communities, crafting an illusion that kept us from recognizing our shared humanity. Jesus urged me to look deeper, to confront the uncomfortable truth. The fear I had always carried stemmed not from questioning faith, but from the rigid structures designed to stifle such inquiries. Suddenly, the idea that I could seek a greater truth became not just an option, but a divine calling. Yet even in the embrace of his light, fear loomed close. I realized the implications of my journey. Uncovering these truths would mean stepping away from the pedestal on which I had stood for years. The emotional void I felt was balancing on the edge of awakening, and I knew I would face backlash. What would the world think if I turned my back on the very faith I had represented so diligently? I contemplated the loneliness that could ensue from revealing my encounters and the stirrings of doubt that had found a home in my heart. But as Jesus continued to illuminate the shadows, I found courage threading through the fabric of my being. "I am calling you to share this awakening," he said, igniting a fire within my spirit. "The truth must be revealed, Ahmed. It's a truth that can awaken hearts, shatter chains, and heal divisions." In that moment, I felt my purpose take flight. The urgency sprang forth. There was no turning back. I understood the risk, but the potential to change lives, to inspire others to seek their truth, overshadowed my fears. Would they support me? Or would I stand alone, cast out for daring to challenge the dogma I had lived by? A profound determination surged within me, compelling me to step into the unknown, armed with the revelation that could change everything. As I knelt in daily prayers, the familiar rhythms of my faith took on an unsettling quality. The words flowed from my lips, echoing traditional verses that had been passed down through generations. Yet inside, I felt an escalating sense of emptiness gnawing at my spirit. I was Ahmed, an Imam respected in my community, yet as the warmth of prayer washed over me, shadows lurked at the edges of my mind. I began to grapple with unexpressed doubts that felt insurmountable, and these internal struggles transformed into unsettling dreams filled with vivid imagery that left me breathless. Each morning, I awoke with a deeper disconnection from my faith, as if I were floating above a reality I no longer understood. These dreams became haunting reflections of my turmoil. I saw visions of a world caught in a spiritual war, where deception puppeteered lives, and people wandered blindly through the fog of manipulated beliefs. Each night, my subconscious seemed to scream a truth I couldn't quite grasp. My heart ached with questions that seemed forbidden to voice. What lay behind the rituals I performed? Why did they leave me feeling hollow, yearning for something beyond mere obedience? With each unanswered question, the burden of seeking truth intensified, and I felt increasingly isolated, trapped within the confines of my own beliefs, yet desperate for a deeper connection. It was during one of these restless nights that everything changed. I fell into a deep sleep, one that transported me beyond my earthly existence. In this surreal state, I found myself enveloped in a brilliant light. It was not just illumination, it was a presence. Jesus stood before me. The moment our eyes locked, warmth flooded my being. "Ahmed," he said, his voice resonating like a gentle breeze. "You've carried the weight of unspoken doubts for far too long. It's time to awaken." In that sacred encounter, my heart opened, and revelations poured forth, each more profound than the last. I felt a rush of understanding, as layers of deception slipped away. exposing the hidden agendas of the elite that had long governed our beliefs and actions. Jesus guided me through visions of a world manipulated by fear and division. I witnessed how leaders prioritized power over compassion, using faith as a weapon to control the masses while diverting our attention from the painful truths that lay beneath the surface. I saw families torn apart, communities pitted against each other, and the egregious ways in which technology perpetuated societal discord. With each revelation, I realized the urgency. This was not merely a personal journey, it was a call to arms against the deception that ensnared us all. The spiritual war required us to awaken, to rise against the forces that sought to keep us in darkness. Freedom from this manipulation hinged on our ability to confront the truth lurking behind the veil of deceit. The implications of my encounter with Jesus weighed heavily on my heart. I was being summoned not only to seek my truth, but to share these revelations with others who were still trapped in blind obedience and fear. The thought of standing before my community, peeling back the layers of tradition to expose the uncomfortable truths, felt daunting. There was so much at stake: my status, my relationships, and the very foundation of my role as an Imam. Yet, as the light of Jesus enveloped me, I could feel courage taking root. This awakening was bigger than I could fathom. I had a responsibility now, to guide others through their own struggles and help them embrace the truth, even if it meant facing backlash and isolation. Even as I wrestled with my fears, the necessity of action burned brightly within me. Jesus' promise of hope ignited a fire in my soul, compelling me to step into the light of truth and away from the shadows of deception. The journey ahead was unknown, but I could no longer stay silent. I began to envision gatherings where people could come together to explore these awakening truths, breaking free from the shackles that held them. With each passing day, the realization grew clearer. This wasn't just my fight. It was a collective journey toward liberation from the hidden agendas that sought to divide us. The time for awakening had arrived, and I felt the weight of it pressing against my chest, a divine calling urging me forward into the unknown. The day of the accident started out like any other. I was Ahmed, a respected Imam in my community, known for my dedication and my ability to guide others through their faith. But there was an emptiness hanging over me that I couldn't quite shake. I found myself grappling with a sense of spiritual imprisonment, trapped by the very beliefs I had spent my life promoting. That afternoon, as I drove home, my thoughts spiraled into the disquiet that had become my constant companion. I was desperate for answers, yearning for meaning beyond the rituals that had defined my existence. As I navigated the roads, my mind wandered deeply into my doubts, allowing the weight of my unvoiced questions to cloud my judgment. In an instant, everything changed. A car swerved into my lane, and in that momentary chaos, I felt an overwhelming adrenaline surge. The impact was deafening. I remember a flash of light, and then an engulfing darkness that swallowed me whole. There was no pain, just an eerie stillness as I slipped into unconsciousness. When I awoke, I was enveloped by an otherworldly light, radiant and pure. It was as if a veil had been lifted, and I was no longer bound by the earthly realm. In that divine moment, I encountered Jesus. He stood before me, a figure of unimaginable love and compassion. The light emanating from him wasn't just illumination. It was a presence that filled the void in my soul. "Ahmed," he spoke, and his voice resonated deep within me. "You are caught in a spiritual war. You followed a path designed by a hidden agenda, and now you must awaken." His words struck at the core of my being, unraveling the layers of deception that had kept me confined in my own beliefs. With each revelation, I was shown the realities of the world. I witnessed how the elite manipulate faith and politics to maintain control over the masses, crafting an illusion that divides us. The images of war, division, and chaos flashed before my eyes, illustrating the intricate web of falsehoods that fueled conflict between communities and nations. It became clear that my own adherence to tradition had blinded me to the truth. I had unknowingly contributed to a system that perpetuated misunderstanding and fear, rather than compassion and unity. Jesus highlighted the urgency of my awakening, revealing how crucial it was for me to share these revelations with others, to liberate them from the mental shackles that bound them. As I processed the weight of this divine encounter, I felt a fierce determination grow within me. I realized the depth of my spiritual imprisonment was not just my burden, it was a collective suffering shared by many. "You must speak out against the deception," Jesus urged. "The truth must be revealed. Humanity needs awakening to break free from this cycle of fear that has kept it divided for too long." His presence filled me with a profound strength, as if I were being charged with a divine mission. The sense of isolation I had known began to melt away, replaced by a calling that felt grander than myself. But as I began to grasp this new understanding, doubts crept in. I was no longer merely an imam. I was now a messenger of truth, facing a world that might not readily accept it. Would my community embrace my revelations, or would I face scorn for abandoning the traditions I had upheld? The fear of losing everything loomed large over me, yet the urgency to share what I had seen ignited a fire within me that I could no longer ignore. The spiritual war was real. It was raging not just in the hearts of individuals, but across the global landscape. I could feel the weight of history pressing down on my shoulders as I prepared to emerge from this transformative experience and into a calling that would redefine my existence. When I finally awoke from the coma, the first thing that hit me was the silence. It was heavy and suffocating, a stark contrast to the vibrant life I once lived as an imam in my community. Ahmed. The name felt distant now, as if I had stepped into a different realm of existence. Around me were the worried faces of family and friends, but their concern quickly turned to confusion when they learned of my experience, my encounter with Jesus, and the profound revelations I had received. I could see the flicker of worry turn into something darker, an unspoken judgment that hung in the air. I felt like a ghost in my own life, haunting the very spaces that once felt familiar. As I attempted to share what had transpired during my time in the light, a wave of rejection flowed over me. "Heretic," they whispered, their eyes filled with disbelief and fear. My family, once my greatest allies, now viewed me with suspicion. Their loyalty and faith clashed violently with the truths I had uncovered. I was now an outsider, branded for daring to challenge the narratives that had defined my existence and the lives of so many around me. I wrestled between the guilt of exposing the hidden agenda of our leaders and the innate desire to embrace the freedom of truth I had found. The very foundation of my identity was shattering before my eyes, and though I yearned for understanding, all I faced was isolation. In that turmoil, the teachings I once held dear became a double-edged sword. The rituals meant to provide solace now only deepened my emotional void. I felt the weight of a community that once celebrated my presence now turning its back on me, driven by the fear of the unknown. The truths I had learned in my visions coursed through my mind. The urgent revelation of a spiritual war being waged against our souls was now my reality. I understood the mechanics of deception that lay behind our faith, orchestrated by those in power, those who used spirituality as a shield for their ulterior motives. This knowledge didn't just challenge me. It had the potential to shake the very core of everything many believed in. The pain of being ostracized seeped into my everyday life. Returning home felt like walking into the eye of a storm. My family hardly spoke to me. They feared I would lead others astray, but in my heart, All I wanted was to guide them toward the truth I had been shown. I was haunted by visions of a world divided by political agendas and religious zeal, where fear kept us from uniting. I struggled to articulate this new vision of hope and awakening to those who had grown up believing that questioning faith was a sin. How do I tell them that the very teachings meant to liberate have become tools of control, I would ask myself. The conflict raging within me unpredictable and tumultuous. Each day I felt the pull between silence and action grow stronger. Would my courage be enough to overcome the fear that gripped my family and community? The realization that I now carried a torch for those still trapped in the deception left me feeling both empowered and terrified. The innumerable stories swirling in my mind, a tapestry of suffering, manipulation, and awakening, begged to be told. But the cost of sharing those truths weighed heavy, and I wondered if I could bear the consequences, standing alone against the very forces that thrived on our division. The urgency of the situation demanded a response, yet the unknown loomed ominously in front of me, a barrier challenging my resolve to transform the pain of my revelations into a light for others to follow. As I prepared to step into this new role, I felt Jesus' presence beside me once more, guiding me toward the path of awakening. I knew I had to face my fears head on, to speak out against the hidden deceptions that bound us. The world needed to hear about the spiritual war that raged just beyond the veil of perceived reality, to understand the manipulation that kept us from acknowledging our collective humanity. Though I was terrified, I was no longer merely a victim of circumstance. I was an agent of change. And as the weight of my mission settled into my bones, I realized that this awakening journey was only just beginning. In the weeks following my awakening, I felt an unquenchable thirst for understanding. My life as an Imam had been devoted to serving my community, yet after everything I had experienced, I found myself questioning everything I had ever believed. The oppressive silence surrounding my journey into faith had begun to tear at me. In my clandestine quest to find solace, I turned to the teachings of Christianity, diving deep into the Bible and the stories of others who had faced their own spiritual awakenings. There was something about their narratives that flickered a spark of hope within me, illuminating the shadows I had been navigating for what felt like a lifetime. As I read the stories of people like me, who had broken free from the shackles of their beliefs and daringly embraced the truth, I felt a connection stronger than I had ever known. Jesus became a figure I could relate to, someone who understood the turmoil of the human heart. Hours turned into days as I immersed myself in prayer, genuine. Conversations directed toward him. I would whisper my fears and doubts, asking for guidance, seeking a way out from the tug-of-war inside my soul. Those moments of prayer were sacred, transforming into a lifeline that offered the comfort I had so desperately sought amidst the turmoil of my awakening. With each passing day, I sensed a deeper stirring within me, a call to action that beckoned me to embrace my identity as a seeker of truth. I explored the concepts of love, forgiveness, and grace, found in the Christian faith, weaving them into the fabric of my understanding. The teachings were an antidote to my spiritual imprisonment, revealing how love could break down the very barriers that had once defined my existence. However, I also felt the weight of the hidden agendas that had fueled division within my own community, the manipulation by those in power that sought to keep us in a state of fear and confusion. My heart ached for those still ensnared, unaware of the deceptive realities shaping our lives. Eventually, the need for a public declaration of my faith became insistent. In secret, I began to plot my spiritual baptism, a rite of passage that would symbolize my rebirth. The thought terrified me. I knew the repercussions I would face from family and community, but the conviction burning within me outweighed the fear of rejection. I arranged to meet with a small group of believers who welcomed me into their fold with open arms, their eyes filled with understanding and encouragement. We spoke of the spiritual war that raged around us, of the urgency needed to awaken others to the truth. They embraced me not only as a friend, but as a warrior for the light, a reflection of the extraordinary journey I had undertaken. The day of my baptism arrived, shrouded in secrecy and reverence. It felt surreal even as I stood there, submerged in water, the chill of the lake contrasting sharply with the warmth of my heart. As the minister spoke the words of affirmation, I felt the weight of decades of fear and doubt wash away. I emerged from the water reborn, filled with the realization that I would no longer walk alone in this spiritual war. The revelation of Jesus as my guide would turn my life path upside down and fill me with purpose. This was the awakening I sought, the promise of truth standing against the deception that had gripped my heart, and by extension, countless others. As I looked into the eyes of those gathered around me, I felt an almost unbearable urgency to share my journey. I envisioned speaking out within my community, standing before the very people who had once turned their backs on me, risking everything to declare the truth I had come to know. The stories of manipulation, the division, and the hidden agendas could no longer remain silent. I knew the path ahead would be fraught with challenges and confrontations, yet within me simmered a determination stronger than any fear. My awakening had birthed a new light, one that I couldn't keep hidden. As I stepped into this new chapter of my life, I was ready to embrace the fight for truth and love, no matter the cost. As I continued to navigate this newfound freedom, I realized that my transformation was no longer just a personal journey. It was a call to something greater. The truth I had discovered, a truth that cut through the layers of deception I had lived under, compelled me to share my experiences with others. I could no longer remain silent in the face of a spiritual war that continued to rage around me. Each revelation I had received from Jesus resonated with urgency, illuminating the narratives obscured by the elite and leading me towards a profound awakening. I sensed the weight of responsibility on my shoulders, understanding that keeping this truth hidden would only perpetuate the cycle of division and fear. The tension continued to build within me, a frayed wire stretched to its limits. My training as an Imam had conditioned me to accept and promote certain beliefs without question. Yet, as I dug deep into my own history, the teachings, the rituals, I uncovered the painful realization that many had twisted these doctrines to serve their own hidden agendas. The political structures surrounding our faith were not merely bureaucratic, they were intricately tied to the machinations of those in power, designed to manipulate us into compliance. I had been a part of that system, and the thought weighed heavily on my heart. How could I have been so blind? I began to imagine the conversations I could have, the connections I could forge. There were countless others who, like me, felt the grip of an unyielding silence around them. How could I confront this? What would my family say? The fear of rejection battered against my resolve. Yet the deeper fear, the fear of not speaking out, became an unbearable reality. I thought of the hundreds of faces I had seen within my community, their eyes searching for answers, just as I had once searched. I felt a burning desire to liberate them from the chains of deception and confusion, to guide them toward the light of truth. With each passing day, I felt the call to action grow stronger. Encouraged by those who had embraced my journey, I realized that my knowledge was not just a personal victory, but a beacon for others. As I pondered the potential repercussions of my decisions, I understood that silence was no longer an option. This awakening was not a solitary endeavor. It was a shared responsibility to awaken others, to shout from the rooftops that there was a way out of the darkness. I envisioned setting up gatherings, safe spaces where people could openly discuss their doubts and fears without the weight of judgment. But as the idea crystallized, doubt crept back in. What if my community rejected me entirely? What if my family turned their backs? Jesus, I whispered in my prayers, give me strength. Those simple words were a lifeline, anchoring me amidst the storm of emotions swirling around me. I knew the risks, I understood the potential backlash, but the thought of remaining silent while witnessing my brothers and sisters ensnared in their own spiritual wars was too much to bear. I had walked through the shadows, tasted the truth, and now it was time to step into the light and share this powerful revelation, whatever the cost. In the weeks following my awakening, I felt a transformation taking shape within me, one that was profound and life-altering. As I embraced my new identity, I realized I could no longer inhabit the same space I once did as an imam. It was a painful but necessary departure from a life that had kept me in a spiritual war, torn between my calling to share the truth and the fear of ostracism. I understood that to evangelize and serve others, I needed to leave the familiar behind, to forge a new path where the seeds of my mission could flourish. My heart ached with the weight of loss, my family, my community, but I knew this was the only way to fulfill the divine purpose I had encountered. With every passing day, realization dawned that life in the West afforded me the opportunity to share my testimony freely. I struggled against the bittersweet memories of my past, a life I had cherished, but also felt trapped within. In overcoming the deception that had shackled me, I was now tasked with a new mission: to inspire hope where despair lingered. I began seeking out those who, like me, had felt the pinch of spiritual emptiness and longed for deeper meaning. I found myself drawn to conversations in cafes, parks, and community centers, where hearts were open and seeking solace in shared stories of awakening. My testimony became a beacon, illuminating the sacred journey that led me out of darkness. Through every story I shared, I recognized the patterns of suffering that often led individuals to their own awakenings. The manipulation and hidden agendas of the elite weren't merely abstract concepts. They had tangible effects on people's lives. I shared the visions I'd experienced, the wars and struggles I had seen play out, not just in my life, but in the world. Those hardships were woven into the very fabric of society, often masked by societal norms that forced silence and compliance. As I opened my heart to these discussions, each moment became a thread connecting us, a reminder that the spiritual war waged beyond all of us was real and urgent. And yet, amidst this burgeoning mission, the pain of separation from my family continued to haunt me. I wished to bridge the gap between what I had discovered and the world that had once been my home. I held on to hope for reconciliation, believing that love could mend the fissures created by my departure from tradition. Each person I met became a part of that dream, a potential ally who could love unconditionally and perhaps see through the lens of the truth I had embraced. The idea that sharing my narrative could spark curiosity within my family, even from afar, nestled deep in my heart. I imagined my family one day hearing my story, not just the narrative of my leaving, but the compelling truths I had discovered along the way. As I continued my journey, the tension persisted within me. The balance between joy of newfound purpose and the sorrow of loss weighed heavily. I was on a precipice, not just of my own spiritual future, but of the future of the world I wished to inspire. I felt the urgency of the awakening grow within me. Time was a fragile illusion, and the world was in desperate need of truth. The spiritual war unfolded not only externally in society, but internally within each person I encountered, reflecting the struggles between love and division. Jesus had illuminated the path for me, and now as I walked it, I realized that each step forward carried the potential to awaken those still lost in confusion. The time for action, for sharing the truth, and sowing the seeds of hope was now. As I stand here, reflecting on my journey from the depths of despair to the luminosity of spiritual awakening, I realized that my story is not just mine alone. It's a shared narrative that resonates with countless souls searching for meaning amid the chaos. Have you ever felt that tug at your heart, that whisper of awakening, urging you to break free from the shadows that confine you? I stand before you as a testament to the truth that lies beyond our fears. Each glimpse of Jesus was not merely a personal revelation. It was an invitation to step into a larger purpose, a purpose that encompasses us all. The world is engulfed in a spiritual war, and I'm here to say that each of you is intricately woven into this narrative of love and liberation. The unseen forces shaping our destinies are not distant. They reside in the very fabric of our lives, urging us to question, to seek, and ultimately, to rise. I want to hear from you. Have you ever had a moment or a dream that cracked your reality wide open? Your stories matter, and I invite you to share them in the comments below. Let's ignite a dialogue that empowers us to break free from the chains of division and fear, not just for ourselves, but for those around us. And, crucially, don't forget to subscribe to Truth from Beyond and hit that notification bell, for there is so much more to discover together. What's coming next will dive even deeper into the narratives of awakening that challenge everything we think we know. Let this be the beginning of a transformative journey for all of us. I'm Ahmed. Thank you for joining me in this sacred space today. Remember, awakening is not just a destination. It's a constant journey, and together, we can illuminate the shadows that veil the truth. Until next time, may you walk in light and love.